Last week, I grabbed coffee with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. He used to be a devout believer, but he proudly told me he had deconstructed all of that. He spent, the first 20 minutes raving about his new life of pure rationality. He broke down his daily routine with the precision of an engineer, the cold plunges for focus, the specific nutrient timing to, maximize his biology, the meditation apps to hack his anxiety. He looked me right in the eye and said, I finally freed myself from all those archaic guilt structures. I just follow the data now. But then the conversation shifted. We started talking about a mutual acquaintance of ours who had recently made a clumsy, slightly controversial post on social media. And the shift in the air was just instantaneous. My friend's carefully curated, rational demeanor, it just evaporated. His eyes narrowed and his voice dropped into this cold, trembling register of absolute fury. He didn't just disagree with the guy. He wanted him erased from professional and social life. He used words like toxic, problematic, and unsafe terms that, the way he emphasized them, sounded suspiciously like sinner and heretic. And when I suggested that, maybe our acquaintance just made a mistake and deserved a second chance, my friend looked at me with genuine horror. There was no excuse for that. He snapped, he's done. That was the moment it clicked for me. He hadn't actually escaped religion at all. He'd simply traded a God who offers forgiveness for a political ideology that offers none. He had traded a church that demands Sunday attendance for a social algorithm that demands 24/7 vigilance. He was desperate to fill a fundamental human void he refused to acknowledge. And in doing so, he'd become exactly what he claimed to hate. A fundamentalist without a theology. Okay, so let's unpack this. That anecdote, it really points to a profound tension in modern life, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
This fundamental human need for structure, for meaning, for belonging. And then what happens when those needs are, disconnected from traditional forgiving institutions? The crucial question is, what fills that void? And what are the societal and individual costs of these new substitutes?
What's so fascinating here is that the search for meaning doesn't just stop because we declare ourselves purely rational, secular beings.
Right, it's a fundamental drive.
Exactly. And our sources are showing a set of interconnected global observations. Everything from demographic collapse across advanced economies to the rise of these profoundly punitive moral systems.
And the fragility of the family unit.
And the intense fragility of that primary social unit, the family. These observations all suggest this void is being filled by highly functional substitutes.
They're less forgiving.
Exponentially less forgiving than the structures they replaced. The problem isn't the absence of meaning, it's the quality of the meaning that's being imported.
What do you mean by quality?
Well, when the demand for absolute meaning meets the reality of human fallibility, and there is no mechanism for grace for forgiveness, the results are socially and, frankly, psychologically destructive.
So our mission for you today is a deep dive into three major areas where this secularization of human need and the resulting social strain are most evident. First, how certain political movements have adopted what look a lot like theological frameworks, creating an unforgiving moral structure. Second, we'll look at the sociological and economic data showing the global pressures that are eroding the core social unit, the family, which is the main producer of social capital.
A critical piece.
And third, we'll analyze what this catastrophic relational breakdown means for everything from your national retirement plan to the future educational opportunities of the next generation. Let's start with that unforgiving structure, the ideological substitute. We're looking at a phenomenon that feels, pretty distinct. Wokeism, operating effectively as a secular theological system.
It really has, and it has established itself as the primary moral culture in contemporary North American and Western societies.
That phrase, primary moral culture, that's key, isn't it?
It is key. It's not just one philosophy among many anymore. It successfully migrated from the fringes of academia, primarily Western universities, where critical theory became highly prominent and institutionalized back in the 1990s.
And from there, it just spread out.
It spilled out, it infiltrated and then dominated media, major corporations, HR departments, and public discourse, becoming the default lens through which many of our institutions now view power, justice, and ethics.
So what gives this framework its distinct, and I think you said it's a revolutionary edge compared to traditional civil rights or social justice movements?
It's the philosophical root in critical theory, which fundamentally rejects the Enlightenment.
It rejects the Enlightenment.
Yes. And what makes it so jarring to traditional liberals and conservatives alike is its view of knowledge itself. Core concepts that we use to define Western thought logic, objectivity, science, reason, debate, they aren't seen as neutral tools of discovery.
So what are they then?
They're explicitly viewed as tools of the oppressive white patriarchy.
Wow, so that's more than just a critique of how those tools have been used historically.
Much more.
That's an attempt to delegitimize the very methods of thought. I mean, if the rules of logic are themselves suspect, then there's no objective ground for debate, is there? There's only power dynamics.
Exactly. And that philosophical move explains why certain traditional social virtues suddenly become moral targets. The sources highlight that traditional values that are deeply embedded in Western society, individualism, hard work, punctuality, delayed gratification.
Things most people would consider virtues.
Right. They are often categorized not as tools for personal advancement, but as things that perpetuate white supremacy. The moral valuation shifts entirely from individual effort and merit to systemic, immutable group dynamics.
And that transforms the ideology into something far deeper than just a political movement.
It becomes a new civil religion, dictating moral orthopraxy.
This is where those parallels to traditional religion become, they're just unavoidable and honestly quite compelling. It seems to map perfectly onto a structure of sin, salvation, and damnation, but it's all using entirely secular language.
You can define a complete secular doctrine right within this framework. So sin is equated with privilege.
Meaning your guilt is assigned based on who you are, not what you do.
Exactly. It's based on intrinsic, ascribed group identity like race or gender that you cannot shed, regardless of your individual actions or intentions.
Okay, so if sin is privilege, what's righteousness?
Righteousness is found only in victimhood. That's what confers moral authority and the right to critique the system.
And damnation.
And finally, the mechanism of social policing, damnation, is delivered through cancellation.
So if you are ascribed guilt, if you're deemed privileged, you have to perform specific acts of contrition just to survive in the social sphere. What does penance look like in this primary moral culture?
It manifests as mandatory rituals, rituals of penance and piety. Penance involves specific, often self-effacing actions like checking your privilege, which is a form of public self-criticism,
right,
and demonstrating allyship, which is this perpetual commitment to the prescribed cause.
And the acts of piety.
Those are the public, high-visibility displays that are necessary to signal your adherence and total awareness of your supposed inherent sin. So think of things like kneeling during the national anthem or posting black squares on social media.
They're performative.
They're designed to be performative. It isn't about private transformation. It's all about public signaling.
But the crucial distinction here, the one that makes this ideology so rigid and I imagine psychologically exhausting compared to traditional faith systems, is the complete systemic lack of forgiveness. There's no absolution.
No.
Why is that impossibility of redemption so central to its structure?
It is the defining and I would argue most damaging feature. And it relates directly back to the definition of sin. If your guilt, your privilege, your oppression is attributed based on an intrinsic group identity, something you inherit and cannot change or wash away,
then you're just perpetually a sinner.
You are perpetually, eternally a sinner. There is no repentance that can genuinely cleanse that stain because the source of the stain is your immutable identity, not some changeable behavior.
A theologian pointed out the logical dilemma here.
Right. Traditional faith offers grace, which is forgiveness independent of merit.
Yeah.
The secular ideology is purely meritocratic and purely structural. If I'm trapped in the oppressor group and the system says there's no escaping that intrinsic state of being, well, there can be no forgiveness.
The system just doesn't contain a theological equivalent of grace.
It doesn't.
Wait, I need to pause on this because this feels like the intellectual core of the unforgiving structure. If I am part of the oppressor class, and my privilege, my sin is permanent, and the ideology's goal is liberation from oppression, then the very existence of the oppressor class is the permanent obstacle. Which means cancel culture isn't a bug. It's a necessary logical function.
That is precisely the argument presented in our sources. Cancel culture is not an unfortunate or extreme side effect. It is the logical conclusion of critical theory's application to social action.
Because if the oppressor class can't escape its guilt,
and if the core goal is dismantling oppression, then the necessary systemic action is to neutralize, silence, or ultimately get rid of the oppressor class entirely.
The logic dictates that because the privileged individual cannot be redeemed, they must be permanently expelled from the sphere of moral and social influence.
Yes, it establishes intrinsic guilt without any possibility of redemption, locking the individual into a permanent state of psychological and social struggle.
The psychological impact of living under that kind of regime must be just immense.
It has to be.
You've replaced a system where moral failure is based on a finite action and can be remedied with a system where failure is intrinsic, eternal, and demands constant performative self-flagellation just to maintain a temporary social standing. It seems like an engine of anxiety and paranoia.
It creates, as one source termed it, a harsh and merciless social world, and it's primarily fueled by the chronic fear of rejection and cancellation.
That basic human need to belong.
Exactly. When that fundamental need is constantly unmet or threatened by this doctrine of perpetual guilt, people suffer. They suffer increased rates of depression, aggression, diminished self-control, and decaying social skills. The new structure demands absolute public vigilance and leaves no room for the complex, messy reality of human mistakes and, most critically, second chances.
The irony is just profound.
It is. Systems arrive from a supposed secular rationality designed to abolish archaic guilt structures, often end up creating systems of guilt that are exponentially more demanding and less merciful than the religious structures they sought to replace.
That discussion of the brittle, unforgiving nature of these new ideologies provides the perfect pivot point. If people are so desperate for meaning, structure, and belonging, we need to examine the traditional institution that was designed to provide these things, the family.
And we really must move beyond viewing the family as merely a private arrangement of convenience. Our sources define the family fundamentally as a relational good.
A relational good. What does that mean exactly?
It's a conceptual shift. It means that the personal destiny and happiness of individuals, their very formation as social beings, depend on viewing these family relationships not as private transactions, but as a fundamental common good.
And the sources stress that this good isn't just closed off. It's not private. It has a public utility. It contributes to the community at large.
Absolutely. The relational good of the family is the primary engine of social capital. It generates substantial positive externalities that benefit the entire community, forming the human and social assets of larger networks.
And sociologically?
Sociologically, the family is identified as the main antidote to both material poverty through direct support networks and spiritual poverty by providing that non-economic meaning. And critically, it is the key institution required to address the overarching global problem of the demographic winter.
To understand why the family is so irreplaceable, we need to analyze its underlying structure, what our sources call its social genome.
Right.
This is the relational DNA that, according to the sources, has no functional substitutes.
Right.
What are the 4 interconnected elements that make up this genome?
Okay, so the theoretical framework identifies 4 essential interconnected elements. They're often abbreviated by their initial letters, G-A-I-L.
G-A-I-L.
Okay. First, you have generativity, G. This is procreation, the having and raising of children, which ensures continuity and generates new social networks.
Simple enough, let's say.
Second is couple sexuality, from the Italian. This is the loving relationship between partners, emphasizing the male-female polarity and focusing on the relationship itself as a third entity, the we that unites them.
Okay, and
third, the norm of reciprocity, I from Italian. This is the internal rule governing everyday relations within the family. It involves the exchange of mutual concern, shared effort, and the expectation of future give and take.
And finally, L.
And fourth, free giving, or the gift culture, L from Italian. This is the foundational motivation. The gift is a basic value for family action and exchange, and it operates entirely outside the economic logic of balancing costs and benefits.
The concept of the gift culture seems to be the one most fundamentally opposed to the world around it, to the hyper-individualized, transactional market economy. Can you elaborate on the difference between transaction and gift in this context?
Certainly. In the surrounding market economy, every exchange is transactional. I give you $5, I receive a product. If I am hired, I give labor, I receive a wage.
It's balanced, it's documented.
Exactly. The transaction is balanced and requires measurable reciprocity. The gift culture, however, relies on gratuitousness. It's based on giving without expectation of immediate or measurable return.
And the source material suggests that the integrity of the family relationship starts to fracture the moment a member introduces that market logic.
That's precisely it. If I start tracking who did the dishes last, or who paid for which bill, or who invested more time and care, I'm introducing transaction where there should be free gift. The family stops being a source of non-economic support and starts being a source of resentment because I'm measuring my sacrifice against your return.
That's where the structure starts to break down.
That destruction of the gift culture is where the structure starts to break down under external pressure.
So that deep sense of unconditional acceptance, rooted in the gift culture, is what defines the family's essential function in society.
It is. And this quality becomes profoundly manifest in families where members are frail or disabled or dealing with chronic illness.
Right.
These families facing specific, intense challenges that the market and the state often struggle to address are said to develop special virtues.
What kind of virtues?
Virtues that enhance their capacity for patient endurance and profound love, precisely because that economic cost-benefit analysis has been superseded by the gift logic. They can't be productive in a market sense, but they are producers of essential relational goods.
And these virtues then spill over into the community as positive externalities. Give us some concrete examples of those societal benefits.
Well, the list is extensive. It includes the rehabilitation and support of the sick and elderly within the home, which significantly reduces the burden on state institutions.
Right.
It includes the reception of migrants, which, as we'll discuss, is often an ethical act performed by families acting across borders. It also includes general social inclusion for those who are marginalized in other spheres, particularly the world of work and consumption.
And adoption, I assume.
Absolutely. Adoptive and foster families are explicit examples of generating immense benefits for society as a whole by extending this relational good, this capacity for unconditional acceptance, to children who otherwise lack it. This relational stability is not just nice, it is the necessary precursor for societal stability.
So when we focus on that first element of the family, genome generativity, procreation, and raising children, we confront what is arguably the most seismic global shift of the 21st century. The demographic winter. The consequences of this shift touch every policy area, from the economy to healthcare.
To grasp the severity, we have to first understand the historical context. The demographic transition. This is a period, it varies widely from 50 to 150 years, during which a population moves from high mortality and high birth rates to low mortality and low birth rates.
And the common public narrative often mistakes the cause of the historic population boom. It wasn't primarily a spike in births, was it?
No, not at all. It was a collapse in mortality. The transition occurs in two stages. Stage 1 involves a sharp decline in mortality. Infant, teenage, and maternal death rates just plummet due to better health, economic progress, hygiene.
So life expectancy doubles.
It might double, going from 30 years to 60 or more. The birth rate initially remains high, which results in a sharply increased natural growth rate and a population explosion. This is a story of saving lives.
But then we enter stage 2.
Families progressively adapt their fertility in response to this newfound lower mortality. That leads to a reduced fertility rate and a lower birth rate overall. But this adaptation, especially in advanced post-transitional countries, overshoots the target.
And that leads directly to the demographic winter.
That's it.
Let's nail down the core data on sub-replacement fertility. What is the precise replacement level, and how far below it is the world today?
In advanced countries, the generation replacement level is 2.1 children per woman. That little margin of 0.1 accounts for the slight skew toward masculinity at birth and the expected mortality rate of women up to the average childbearing age.
And globally.
If we look globally, the world's estimated annual fertility rate declined drastically from 5.0 in the 1950s. The world dipped below the replacement level globally in the late 1970s or early 1980s.
That's much earlier than I think most people realize.
It is, and forecasts suggest stabilization around 2.2 by 2050, but that global average masks the severe declines in highly secularized nations.
So in highly secularized Western European nations and East Asian powerhouses, the fertility rates are often dramatically lower, sometimes below 1.5. And this leads us directly to the crisis of aging, the phenomenon known as gerontogrowth.
Gerontogrowth is the perfect term. It describes the rapid flow of elderly people relative to the working population. The world population aged 65 or more doubled in just 35 years, from 1950 to 1985.
Right.
And then it doubled again in the following decades. Think about the speed of that transformation. It's unprecedented.
So what's the challenge that this poses?
The challenge is twofold. In rapidly aging developing nations like China, the state must urgently build robust support systems, but currently they are insufficient. This leads to immense pressure on the few adult children supporting multiple generations.
But the challenge in northern countries, with existing comprehensive social security nets, is different, right? It's not just about building systems, it's about financing them. And that's where an ethical crisis starts to emerge.
That's where the structural failure is most profound. Northern countries have these generalized pension, health insurance, and social security systems that are based on intergenerational solidarity. The working generation funds the retired generation.
So when the working population shrinks relative to the retired population,
The contributions required become relatively high. And the risk, as outlined in the sources, is that high contribution levels and shrinking resources could lead to a societal mentality of lesser consideration for the elderly.
and this is where policy becomes morally fraught.
It starts undermining the relational good of solidarity.
Can you elaborate on how this lesser consideration might manifest in policy terms?
Yeah.
Because that sounds like a catastrophic breakdown of social ethics.
It can manifest as a kind of structural triage. The data suggests potential risks like limitations on health insurance coverage for age-related conditions, or the withholding of aggressive treatments for certain illnesses in old age justified by economic necessity or resource allocation.
And the most extreme manifestation.
The most extreme manifestation cited is the legislating of euthanasia. This policy has already been implemented in some post-transitional countries. It's often justified under the guise of compassion, but it simultaneously serves as a structural release valve for the economic pressure caused by geronto growth.
So the policy effectively transfers the cost of sustained care onto the elderly population itself, framing death as a rational choice instead of a structural failure.
That's the danger. And the sources strongly imply that societal survival hinges on recognizing the family's contribution to generational solidarity. This crisis is not purely economic, it's fundamentally metaphysical.
Which brings us back to the cultural shift influencing fertility rates.
Absolutely. The economic pressures are real, but the deepest driver is the way the modern culture views the child. The child is often viewed as a choice or a right, prioritizing the here and now individual perspective, focused on maximizing parental autonomy and self-fulfillment.
As opposed to what?
As opposed to viewing the child as a gift inserted into the intergenerational chain, carrying the free gift received from previous generations. If you see the child as an asset or a customizable choice, then they have to fit perfectly into your personal life plan.
And when childbirth moves from a natural, expected occurrence to a process of rational planning, what is the observable outcome on fertility?
When birth is experienced as rational planning, choosing whether, when, and how to have a child based on maximizing perceived conditions for success, financial stability, career achievement, perfect timing, it leads to an unstoppable systemic decline in births.
And we see that in the data.
We see mothers postponing motherhood close to the threshold of 35 years, often missing the window entirely, and the widespread adoption of the single-child family model in places like Italy and Spain.
The irony is that the freedom to choose, when prioritized above the relational good of generativity, ironically leads to the societal constraint of demographic collapse and profound economic instability.
Precisely.
We've established the severe global pressure on generativity. Let's narrow the focus now to the United States, where the strain is manifesting not just as a universal demographic slump, but as a stark class split within the family structure. It's creating a massive opportunity gap.
This phenomenon, which has been rigorously detailed by sociologists like Robert Putnam, argues that the family is no longer a shared institution across socioeconomic lines.
What does that mean, not a shared institution?
It means the class divergence in family stability is so profound, it is actively creating a two-tiered system for children's access to resources, social, cognitive, and economic, that are necessary for future success.
Let's use the hard data to illustrate this divergence. The scissors chart comparing family stability based on the mother's education level is, well, it's shocking. Let's start with non-marital births.
This data perfectly visualizes the split. For college-educated women, the rate of non-marital births has remained very low, around 7%, showing a high degree of relational stability before childbearing.
But for high school educated women?
For high school educated women, the rate has soared over the last 3 decades, peaking at over 50%. A 2007 measure put it at 57% of all births for that demographic.
I just want to linger on that number for a moment. More than half of all children born to high school educated mothers are starting life outside of a stable two-parent marital structure. What are the policy and sociological implications of a 50+ percentage point difference between the top and bottom of the education strata?
The implication is massive instability. Children born outside of a two-parent stable unit are statistically more likely to experience poverty, multiple transitions of male partners in the home, and general relational turbulence.
And this instability erodes that social genome we talked about.
Fundamentally, it erodes the capacity for sustained reciprocity and gift culture, creating obstacles to their cognitive and socio-emotional development right from birth. The stability that college-educated parents retain is acting as a powerful multiplier of privilege.
And divorce rates, while they seem to be tapering off nationally, they conceal this exact same class split.
They absolutely do. The national divorce rate peaked around 1980 and then trended down, which was misleadingly positive. Underneath that average, the story was one of bifurcation.
How so?
Divorce rates fell significantly for college-educated people after 1980, coinciding with greater economic independence and stability. Conversely, divorce rates continued to rise among their high school-educated counterparts, even as marriage itself became less common in that stratum.
So by the late 2000s.
By 2008-2010, the relational stability divide was undeniable. The ratio of divorced to married people among the high school educated was double that of college graduates, roughly 28 per 100 versus 14 per 100.
So the poor are marrying less, and when they do, they're splitting up more often. And the affluents are marrying at high rates, and their marriages are becoming more durable.
That's the story. Stability is consolidating among the affluent, while instability is becoming the norm for the working class and the poor.
And this instability translates immediately into a measurable investment gap in the children.
It does. We know that healthy brain development, cognitive stimulation, and socio-emotional growth are closely correlated with parental education and social class. College-educated parents have rapidly increased their time and monetary investments in their children compared to less affluent parents.
We can track this subtle time investment using something as simple as family dining, the family dinner chart.
The family dinner chart is profoundly telling because it measures consistent parental presence and structured time investment. For college-educated parents, the rate of families who usually eats dinner together stayed consistently high, around 75%.
So that structural time investment was maintained.
It was maintained regardless of career pressures. For high school-educated parents, however, the rate dropped significantly, from 80% in 1978 down to 65% by 2005.
A 15-point drop.
That 15-point drop represents thousands of hours of lost conversation, lost cognitive stimulation, and lost opportunity for the development of reciprocal relationships. The consistent structure, which is crucial for building trust and stable expectation, is vanishing most quickly among the demographic already facing the highest economic volatility.
And beyond direct parental time, there is a massive disparity in social resources, what sociologists call social capital, specifically in the form of mentorship.
The mentorship deficit is severe, and it works to reinforce the opportunity gap. Affluent kids benefit from a much wider and deeper pool of informal mentors. Teachers, youth leaders, coaches, professional family friends.
They're plugged into powerful, weak ties.
Exactly. The sources show that affluent kids are 2 to 3 times more likely to have mentors from virtually all categories outside the extended family.
And poor children are structurally isolated from these external networks.
They are. Poor kids are significantly less likely to have any mentoring support at all outside the home. And if they do receive mentorship, it is almost exclusively limited to their immediate or extended family.
What does that look like in the data?
The data is a stark indictment of social isolation. Nearly 2/3 of affluent children, 64%, have some form of mentoring beyond their extended family, while nearly 2/3 of poor children, 62%, have no mentoring beyond the extended family.
It's a huge gap.
And this lack of access to diverse, non-familial social networks significantly limits their social mobility, their career horizons, and their educational advancement, trapping them in the same relational and economic stratum as their parents. The breakdown of the family among the poor is simultaneously causing and being caused by a fundamental failure of the common good to provide substitute social support.
We've established that the family is a relational good whose stability is under massive demographic and socioeconomic strain. Let's look at one of the most intense manifestations of family strain, migration.
Right.
It creates this paradoxical ethical imperative and an immense relational cost.
Migration, for over 1 billion people today, is fundamentally an ethical act of and for the family. While macroeconomic factors, wage differentials, demographic imbalances between nations are the distal drivers, the on-the-ground repellent is almost always the obligation of the family unit to care for its members.
And we see this in countless anecdotes.
The Filipina nurse taking long, brutal shifts in San Diego to support her children's education back home, or the Haitian accountant driving a taxi in Boston for years to fund a daughter's necessary medical treatment.
So the migration is a sacrifice of the relational good of presence for the material good of economic stability.
Precisely. Familyhood is now often defined across long distances and borders, and this necessary sacrifice comes with a tremendous hidden emotional cost, the trauma of separation and what social scientists call ambiguous loss.
What is ambiguous loss?
Ambiguous loss occurs when a person is physically absent but psychologically present, or vice versa. In the case of migration, the non-immigrating caregiver, often a grandparent, an aunt, a neighbor who becomes the de facto parent, is present, but the true parent is absent.
And this separation creates profound emotional burdens, especially for children.
Yes, the adolescents who were interviewed for these studies described separation from the non-immigrating caregiver as losing their light.
Their light.
One teenage Dominican girl, recalling leaving her mother behind to join her father in the U.S., said, "I felt like my heart was staying behind. Because she was the only person I trusted, she was my life. I felt as if a light had extinguished."
That is a staggering expression of trauma. The emotional weight of that observation, the extinguishing of one's guiding light, must be internalized by these children for years.
It is.
And reunification doesn't necessarily solve it. It introduces entirely new forms of relational turbulence.
It doesn't. Reunification is fraught with contradictory emotions and requires difficult adaptation. Children must adjust to the long-absent parent, sometimes meeting new step-parents or step-siblings, often leading to intense jealousy and complex loyalty issues.
So you get jealousy between the kids born here and the ones who weren't.
A Nicaraguan mother noted the stark truth. Jealousy exists between those who were born here and those who were not. Furthermore, the immigrant parent, often the mother, experiences intense guilt and stress. The longer the separation, the more that parental authority and credibility are undermined upon reunion.
The child might resent the parent for the absence.
They may feel abandoned despite understanding the financial sacrifice. The parent is physically present but psychologically stressed, exhausted, and often emotionally unavailable due to that stress and displacement, which further complicates the relational repair.
This inherent stress on the caregiver brings us to the broader policy crisis, where society seems to fundamentally undervalue this necessary, often life-sustaining work. The sources argue that policymakers fail to see the family as an economic actor.
Exactly. The core policy problem is one of perception. Policymakers and the public often perceive the family as a private hobby or an individual lifestyle choice, not as an endeavor contributing significantly and non-fungibly to the common good.
So the policy is tailored to the individual, not the family unit.
It's tailored to the autonomous transactional individual, overlooking the relational unit that produces the future workforce and cares for the vulnerable.
The COVID-19 pandemic served as a massive amplifier of this policy failure, didn't it? It showed who was actually doing the essential work.
It was a shocking moment of clarity. The immediate closure of schools and daycares demonstrated how reliant the productive economy was on institutions that were the biggest source of free public childcare.
And when those vanished?
When those vanished, the disproportionate caregiving demands placed on women, forcing millions to exit the labor market or dramatically reduce hours, was magnified globally. This confirmed that family care is not seen as a socially supported task, but as a private, unavoidable cost women must shoulder alone, despite its immense public utility.
And we see the most extreme, heartbreaking example of this devaluation in the crisis of support for disabled and elderly care, particularly within the Medicaid system in the U.S.
The support systems for care workers are systemically broken because of sustained poor policy choices. Medicaid reimbursement rates for home and community-based care workers are notoriously low, leading to poverty wages and high turnover.
And these jobs lack benefits.
They often lack benefits, creating a chronic staffing crisis in a sector where demand is soaring due to Geronto growth.
So when there aren't enough qualified external workers, the burden inevitably falls back onto family caregivers,
who are then forced to shoulder it without adequate financial or social support. It's a cruel feedback loop. The only individuals who can sometimes access support are those who fit the dominant narrative of the autonomous individual who can achieve competitive, integrated employment, leaving the most severely disabled and, critically, their family caregivers isolated and unsupported by state resources.
The public sphere starves the family unit and then demands the family unit perform an impossible labor of love in isolation.
That's a very good way to put it.
Let's return to the concept of the family genome, that unique, non-fungible relational structure we identified earlier, and look at the external forces of modern life that are actively mutating it. a process called morphogenesis.
Yes.
The outside world is systematically eroding the four elements of the family's DNA.
This family morphogenesis shows how generativity, couple sexuality, reciprocity, and the gift culture are under intense siege from highly functional but corrosive systems, the very systems designed by the rational, secular world.
So how does the pervasive capitalist economy attack the core principle of gratuitousness?
The capitalist economy attacks the gift culture. L. It introduces utilitarian elements and relentless consumerism into the home. It transforms spontaneous, gratuitous giving into transactional exchange, often substituting material gifts for relational time and presence.
It undermines the non-economic logic.
It completely undermines the foundation of non-economic logic necessary for the family to function as a common good, shifting the internal calculation from love to utility.
And the digital world seemed to eliminate the basis for face-to-face relational effort.
The digital world and virtual reality eliminate the necessity of the norm of interpersonal reciprocity. Technology isolates individuals, even while they're virtually connected globally across massive networks.
And this gives them a virtual identity.
An identity that is responsive to them 24/7, making the complex, effortful task of genuine reciprocity with the people closest to them, their family, seem burdensome and unnecessary. Why negotiate a complex relationship when a virtual feed validates you instantly?
And the sexual revolution, supported by technology, directly challenges the definition of the couple itself.
It profoundly modifies couple sexuality. A. It questions the fundamental male-female polarity and leads to the proliferation of an indefinite number of gender identities. This challenges the relational structure derived from the difference and complementarity of the sexes, which Aristotle and many subsequent philosophers viewed as the fundamental driver of the household unit.
And finally, human reproduction technologies modify generativity at its biological root.
Yes, human reproduction technologies, MAP, directly modify generativity, G. The most powerful recent policy example cited is the new French law extending medically assisted procreation, MAP, to single women and asexual couples.
So this institutionalizes the absence of a father.
It institutionalizes, by policy design, the absence of a father in generation. This move profoundly changes family networks, separating generativity from couple sexuality and reciprocity and creating a situation where the identity and origins of the children involved are structurally altered with potentially unfathomable long-term consequences for social stability and the child's relational map.
To put these modern shifts into context, we should step back and look at how philosophers have always viewed the family's relationship to the state. The arguments of Aristotle versus Plato are foundational here.
They are. Aristotle taught that the family precedes the state, the household, oikia, being the self-sufficient unit upon which the city-state, polis, is built, and he famously criticized Plato's radical communism of wives and children outlined in the Republic.
Plato wanted to dissolve all private familial attachments to create unity.
Maximal unity in the state, yes. But Aristotle argued that if you abolish the family, you dilute love and dissolve the necessary components of the state.
How so?
Precisely. Aristotle argued that the pursuit of maximal unity would abolish the state itself by dissolving the necessary differences and plurality required for a functional city-state. If everyone called the thousands of collective children their own, the love granted would be completely diluted.
He said it was better to be a private nephew.
Better to be one's private nephew than a son in this collectivist sense, because at least a nephew has a defined, specific relational bond. The private household is foundational because it is the location where specific, intense love is cultivated.
And if we fast forward nearly 2 millennia, we see the shift initiated by the Enlightenment, the move from marriage as a sacrament to a contract.
This intellectual and legal shift, largely initiated by thinkers like John Locke, fundamentally changed the moral and legal understanding of the family unit. Locke suggested that marriage need not be for life.
He saw it as a voluntary contract.
A voluntary contract that could be terminated once its specific purposes, procreation, and education were secured. This contrasts sharply with the earlier Christian tradition, which viewed marriage as a sacrament, emphasizing its indissolubility based on the sacred, permanent relational bond.
And the contract view dominates modern law.
It emphasizes individual rights, utility, and ease of termination, rather than the relational bond itself as the irreducible common good. This prioritization of individual utility sets the stage for the highly individualized and transient family forms we see today, constantly in danger of being worn down by the transactional forces of the surrounding culture.
So if the family genome is under constant attack from external forces, capitalism, digital isolation, and technological modification. What is the necessary countermeasure for society to maintain family health and, by extension, social health?
The sources emphasize the critical need for a relational culture, and specifically relational reflexivity.
Relational reflexivity, what is that?
It's the complex, conscious act of constantly taking into account the concerns of others to actively care for the relationship itself, moving beyond mere individual inner introspection.
That sounds like a constant demanding effort. How is that different from the vigilance demanded by the secular ideology we discussed at the start?
The key difference is the orientation. The secular ideology demands vigilance against one's own intrinsic sin or guilt to maintain social standing. Relational reflexivity demands effort directed outward, treating the other as a true you, not an extension of the self.
So it's about modifying your own concerns to accommodate the other.
Specifically for the sake of sustaining the relationship itself. It is the evaluative activity of a person aware that they need to invest in their relationships gratuitously to benefit from positive effects.
And it is overwhelmingly in the family that these primary social virtues are learned.
Trust, cooperation, responsibility, solidarity, all of them. If society loses this non-fungible resource of the family genome, if the 4 elements of GAIL fail, the risk is that society degrades into a chaotic state, metaphorically described as family warming. So we have completed a wide-ranging deep dive into profound, interconnected pressures. We've seen the sociological emptiness in the West being filled by these unforgiving secular ideologies based on intrinsic and permanent guilt.
We've analyzed the demographic shifts undermining generational solidarity and pressuring ethical boundaries.
And we've reviewed the policy crises that turn essential caregiving into an isolated, privatized burden. The challenge to the relational fabric of society is immense, and it really is a crisis of meaning and structure.
It brings us back directly to that friend from the opening narrative. Whether it's through a harsh ideology that demands absolute purity and perpetual vigilance, or through economic and technological forces that isolate us in a virtual identity governed by transactional utility, we seem desperately eager to replace the organic, messy, forgiving, and demanding reality of authentic relational life, the relational good of the family, with something more controllable, more predictable.
And ultimately, colder and less human.
Indeed. The data suggests that for a society to survive and flourish, it has to recognize that the stability of the social capital, the generosity of its citizens, are fundamentally built upon the relational stability of its families.
And when the public sphere treats the family, the only institution that generates social capital, trust, and unconditional acceptance outside of economic necessity, as merely a private hobby, it destroys the engine of the common good itself.